Welcome to week 2 of the Upper Bound Summer Session of 2014. Previous week, you've been developing an understanding of inequality in the United States. You've learned about the road for African Americans and other minority groups in the United States for the past 100 years. In this past week, we'll look at a law that came in as a direct result of the Civil Rights Movement. We have all done lots to learn about the efforts of thousands of people to bring equality to all Americans in the 1950s and 60s, and now we'll see what the outcomes of those efforts were. The first items that many historians discuss when we talk about the breakdown of Jim Crow laws and segregation in the United States is the desegregation of schools in the 1950s. Headlined by the famous Brown versus Board case, where the Supreme Court overturned another famous Supreme Court case, Plessy versus Ferguson. Basically, the Plessy case from 1896 decided that even though whites and blacks were separated by segregation, they were still considered equal. The Brown versus Board case overturned that, meaning that they went against a case that was already decided, which was a humongous deal because 1, that really doesn't happen much, and 2, because it now says the United States law believes that when whites and blacks are separated by segregation, they are not treated in this overall topic. However, I really don't want to focus on it too much because there is not much debate behind the issue today. I can't imagine anyone coherently arguing that we are better off segregated as a society. Instead, we will focus on a topic that is still debatable today, and that is affirmative action. Affirmative action comes from an executive order from President Kennedy, Order 10925 in 1961. Here, JFK says, "The contractor will not discriminate against any employee or applicant for employment because of race, creed, color, or national origin. The contractor will take affirmative action to ensure that applicants are employed and that employees are treated during employment without regard to their race, creed, color, or national." It is basically making businesses responsible for hiring applicants of color and treating them equal without prejudice towards anything that could make them different. It actually demands that companies give preferential treatment to African Americans over whites when it comes to hiring. Later, under President Johnson, this order was expanded to give equal treatment to women by not discriminating against applicants based on gender. And even later, it was expanded to people with disabilities. Not only is the American president saying that companies should hire people regardless of what color, gender, or religion they are, but he is demanding that companies actually prefer applicants of color over typical white males. Imagine if prejudice in the United States was a car. During slavery and the years of Jim Crow, the car was in drive and going very fast. With these executive orders now, the car wasn't just put in neutral so that it can't go forward anymore, but it was actually put in reverse to make up ground that was lost during centuries of slavery and segregation. Who was the president that replaced JFK when he was assassinated, said this about affirmative action: "You do not take a person who, for years, has been hobbled by chains and liberate him, bring him up to the starting line of a race, and then say, you are free to compete with all the others, and still just believe that you have been completely fair." Over the years, affirmative action has sparked some pretty hot debate. The issue has come up again and again in situations regarding acceptance into college, promotions at work, and scholarships for specific minority groups. Today, we are left with a very relevant debate that asks, is affirmative action still necessary in America? In essence, the question being asked is there still enough racial discrimination or racial inequality in the United States to merit such a program? It's a difficult question to answer because it's requiring us to agree with affirmative action and say that inequalities and weekly earnings in other areas of life are because of discrimination that still exists in our nation today. How do you prove that there is discrimination? However, if you disagree with affirmative action, then you must prove that inequalities in pay and other standards of living exist for reasons outside of discrimination. Again, a very hard thing to prove. Your task this week is to thoroughly research both the pro side of affirmative action, which is the side that agrees with it, and the con side, and that is the side that disagrees with it. Once you are convinced of one side or the other, then you create a thesis that thoroughly describes your stance and the reasons that support it. By provided multiple articles that describe the topic thoroughly. I tried to find ones that didn't necessarily push the reader to have an opinion on it. Next, I found multiple sources that argue one side or the other. These might be news articles, court cases, where the opinions of the judges would provide great support for your stance, and other opinions. The difficulty with this lesson is finding at least 3 topics that support your thesis. However, this will be almost impossible to write without research, so that will make it easier for you to include it in your